Yes, indeed. Hello, marketers. How are you? Great pleasure to be here. My job is to talk a little bit about differentiation and some of the major changes I see, and I think Kantar sees going on in the marketing space. And it's a story, I think, that's told over 3 different chapters. So let me take you through those 3 chapters. And then, of course, we'll have a little Q&A. If you've got any questions, you can enter them. And right at the end of the session, I'll do the weekend weather forecast as well. So let's start by the first chapter, which is really in the beginning. And we're going to go back more than 50 years to the origins of differentiation. And if you go back far enough, it really is at the center of almost everything. And we've got to go back to this handsome gentleman here, Russell Reeves, and the idea of the USP, or the unique selling proposition. According to Reeves, it was a proposition that must be one that the competition either cannot or does not offer. Therefore, it must be unique, either uniqueness of the brand or a claim not otherwise made in that particular field. So right from the beginning, differentiation was about finding that unique thing. And when Professor Michael Porter got involved, it continued to be that quest for uniqueness. Porter had different strategies that you could play, and one of them was the differentiation strategy, in which, as he says, a firm seeks to be unique in its industry along some dimensions that are widely valued by buyers. It is rewarded for its uniqueness with a premium price. And that search for uniqueness continued all the way through into the 80s in the work of Al Ries, famously Ries and Trout. And Ries had pretty much the same message as the predecessors. Each product, depending on the category, has a set of different attributes. Your product becomes unique if it's known by one of these attributes. Owning such an attribute will allow you to successfully highlight your product at service. But note, you cannot own the same attribute or position as your competitor. So again, a slightly weaker message, but still about achieving uniqueness through the ownership of an attribute. And the analogy I would use is, it's kind of like that great moment in Pulp Fiction where Travolta opens the box to discover the magical, unique thing at the heart of whatever it is. We never get to find out what it is, but it's the center of everything, and it's incredibly special. And that, for me, is the closest analogy I can find to this quest for uniqueness that drove differentiation and very much drove marketing. Because every great marketing professor of that era basically said, as you can see here, Ted Levitt, my hero, saying if marketing is about anything, it's about differentiating. Phil Kotler, the same message. Differentiation is the cornerstone of successful marketing. So you see how this plays out. Uniqueness drives differentiation, and differentiation was and is the whole point of marketing. And it reaches its zenith with Jack Trout's work, differentiate or die. Yeah, literally die. This is how aroused we became at the thought of differentiation and achieving this fabled golden uniqueness. So let's move to chapter 2, because at some point there was a change. There was a realization that maybe this was all a load of old bollocks. And I say that with all respect to Professor Michael Porter and all those that followed him. I think they might have got it wrong. So what happened to many marketers like me, a whole generation, I think, is we went off on a chase to find these unique things that would give us differentiation and therefore make our marketing successful. And as we started to examine and scrutinize more and more data on brand perceptions from the market, we found there were 2 or 3 things that were clearly missing. So the first thing that happens when you look at a decent set of quantitative perceptual data from the market is you realize there is masses of non-variant data. And what I mean by that is it's not as if some brands stand for this and some brands stand for that. When you look at this data, the market tends to move in a wildebeest fashion across the brands in pretty much the same direction. The other thing that was missing were any of these unique associations. As you look through the data, what becomes apparent is No brand, no matter how successful they may be, has access to this magical, fabled, golden, unique stuff that apparently Porter and everyone else was telling us we had to find. And finally, even that stuff at the end that Al Ries is talking about, even if it wasn't unique, we couldn't even own an attribute. Brands don't own these associations. It's not as if on one of these particular words, on a 7-point Likert scale, our brand is 6.5 on average, and all the other brands are 2.8. You literally never see that. Ownership of attributes might sound good in Al Ries's book, but it doesn't bloody happen when you actually look at the data. And so we entered a new chapter, a chapter driven by Professor Byron Sharp and by Ehrenberg Bass. And it's a chapter that's literally 10 years old, given the book came out almost exactly a decade ago. And one of Sharp's many famous quotes, rather than striving for meaningful, perceived differentiation, the very things we've just learned about from Kantar, marketers should instead seek meaningless distinctiveness. Yeah, meaningless distinctiveness. And if you delve into the pages of the Great Red Book, easily the most influential book of the last 30 years in marketing, what you discover is very clearly a treatise to do exactly that. You'll see tables like this that suggest that positioning is the old or past worldview and salience is now replacing it. That differentiation, again, is in the past and distinctiveness replaces it. My criticism of Ehrenberg Bass is matched by my respect and admiration for them because, can you believe it, I can hold two contradictory thoughts in my head at the same time. I love what Ehrenberg Bass has done to our industry, but they go too far, in my professional opinion. There's a little touch of dogma in their science. There's a little bit too much sizzle in the steak of their effectiveness work. They go 20 or 30% too far, as evidenced here, right? Rather, so they're setting up some kind of battle between distinctiveness replacing differentiation as if it's a choice, and portraying positioning as a past worldview to be replaced by the new Ehrenberg Bass approach. I think that's a ridiculous division, as you'll see, even though I really love the addition of distinctiveness to our marketing toolkit. And the results, because of the influence of Ehrenberg Bass and the Great Red Book and everything else over the last decade, have resulted in many marketers falling for the dogma and saying basically differentiation doesn't exist. It's an old worldview. It's now all about distinctiveness. If you know anything about the marketing literature, you see idiot articles like this all the time. Be distinctive, not different. Differentiation versus distinctiveness, as if they are somehow competing ideas. Distinctiveness is the new differentiation, or distinctiveness beats differentiation. Yeah, on the back of the head with a big metal bar. It's nonsensical, juvenile, stupid stuff. What is, therefore, the Ehrenberg Bass case against differentiation? Now, let me be careful because I do not want to paraphrase incorrectly any of the amazing work out of the Institute. So let me list direct from the book the 5 critiques of differentiation that have spurned this rejection of differentiation. Well, the first one, which is rather strange, is brands don't attract wildly different consumers. That's an odd one, in my opinion. Yeah, why would we look at targeting as proof against differentiation? It's kind of like saying the reason England won't win the Cricket World Cup is because Marcus Rashford isn't scoring any goals right now. That one just doesn't make sense to me, right? The second one, brands don't possess unique associations. As you'll see in a moment, I agree. I think the chase for uniqueness is a mistake that not only Ehrenberg Bass has made, but even the great Michael Porter has made. And very humbly, I'd like to suggest that everybody got that one wrong. And uniqueness is at the core of our problem and our issues over the last 10 years. Brands aren't perceived as being different to competitors anymore. And again, you'll find that Ehrenberg Bass provides some data in the book How Brands Grow to illustrate that point, looking at which customers really perceive the brand to be different or really perceive it to be unique. Now, the first point is there are categories, spirits, supermarkets, etc., where almost half the market does think that a certain brand is different from the others. And that's a very strange way to disprove differentiation. One of my points is not all brands are different. It isn't something that you just get automatically. I think a small proportion have achieved it. And therefore, this data doesn't exactly disprove it. I would also suggest, and it's a broader point, asking, do you think this brand is different, is probably not the strongest measure of differentiation. A stronger measure might be to look at the brand perceptions and see if those perceptions are specifically different from other brands. And here we reach the weak point in Ehrenberg Bass data. My goodness, they've got amazing data on many things, but they sure as shit haven't got great data on the absence of differentiation. This is the main source of evidence to disprove differentiation. A table from 20 years ago that compares non-competitive brands, some other unknown brands, on very generic values. So here we have the perceptions of FedEx, Nokia, and Oracle, and 3-4 other mysterious brands measured on these relatively generic attributes. Now, once again, you'll notice that some of these brands are actually very different, right? That one brand, Oracle, is twice as different in proportionate terms to mystery brand B. Again, that looks like difference to me. But the key point here is these variables may not be what these brands are positioning on, right? They seem awfully generic. So I spent a bit of time and I looked back to 2002 to try and find if any of these brands I could find out what their positioning was. The only one I could find was a document from Nokia from 2002 with its brand values. You'll note that for the most part, Nokia isn't worried about these variables here, so why would it be different upon them? It should be generic, but there is one exception. If you look down there, passion for innovation is indeed one of the values at the time that Nokia was positioning on. And what do you know? Oh, look, it's quite relatively different from the other brands. So brands aren't perceived as being different to competitors. I think that all comes down to which attributes we measure and how we measure them. Two other points from Ehrenberg Bass. Purchase drives perceived differences. This is a big point Professor Sharp often makes. Decades of research, he says, have documented how attitudinal perceptions strongly reflect the past buying of the respondents. So, simply our market share. Of course, attitudes also affect buying, but the effect turns out to be weaker than we used to think it was, while the effect of buying on brand attitudes is very strong. So you see what Sharp's point here is. He's arguing reverse causality. Now, we can quote some work here from another marketing scientist, the wonderful Professor Cohen-Pauls, who's got wonderful longitudinal data soon to be published in a large marketing journal. And sure enough, he finds in a survey of 153 brands, 30 examples where Sharp is absolutely right. Buying it then drives attitudinal change. So Professor Sharp is not incorrect. But he is incorrect because also Pauls is able to record 35 examples where attitudinal perception precedes purchase and another 11 examples where the two drive each other. It is not correct to say, for the most part, purchase drives attitude. It is more correct to say sometimes attitude drives purchase and sometimes they drive each other. The point is we're dismissing the role of brand perceptions too easily, too openly, and perceived differences can and do drive purchase. Another point that Ehrenberg Bass make, differentiation does not affect price sensitivity. The claim is, if brands really did vary in their degree of differentiation, we might see them exhibit different price elasticity as customers of more differentiated brands would be less sensitive to price. However, price elasticity seems to vary more with the context of the price change. That's simply not true. And we can thank Kantar here for the data to prove it. Salience has relatively little impact on pricing power, according to Kantar data, but what do you know? Difference, and especially meaningful difference, drives enormous amounts of pricing power. And that makes sense if you think about it. Let's talk about something that Ehrenberg Bass rarely talk about, which is price premium, price sensitivity, pricing. If I offer you a bag of sugar for $100 and someone turns up and offers you another bag of sugar for $80, you're going to take the $80 bag of sugar because there's no difference between the two bags. But if I have differentiated brands, like an iPhone, for example, costing $900, and I offer you a much less impressive, less different alternative phone for $220, you're going to take the iPhone. Perceived difference is a driver of growth, but it's a particular driver of price insensitivity because it takes us away from commodification, generating the potential for price premium. Ehrenberg Bass' final criticism, differentiation does not lead to brand growth. It does. They claim, in spite of nearly every textbook telling marketers to strive for differentiation, real-world competition is about competitive matching rather than avoiding competitors by delivering differences. Furthermore, textbooks offer no evidence that differentiation leads to brand growth. Well, maybe the textbooks don't, but Kantar has it. What it shows is, again, salience, distinctiveness is a big driver of demand power, but so too is difference and meaningful difference. They can all be factors in this. And again, we can celebrate salience as being a big driver while not necessarily eliminating difference, because you know what, again, you could have two competing ideas in your head at the same time if you're relatively smart. Think about what we've been saying for 10 years. Simple face validity tells you that when someone looks at a Dell laptop versus an Apple laptop, they are not going to perceive those two things to be the same. To make that point is bananas. It's more than just salience, clearly. So we're entering a third age of differentiation, in my opinion, partly thanks to Kantar, who've done a really good job of continuing to make the point. And I think we're in an era now of bothism. So what I'm going to do is move to the middle of my slide with the assistance of my beautiful, thank you, and invisible assistant. Let's talk about these two terms and how you as a marketer can harness both. Because I love distinctiveness. I love the work of Ehrenberg Bass. I just don't see why we have to lose differentiation because of it. I'm a bothist deep down. So let's first make the very important point that these two things are very much not the same thing. A lot of people will tell you they're the same. Again, if we look at wonderful Kantar data, what we will see is over thousands of brands, those that are perceived to be very different are not necessarily perceived to be very salient. If you look at that correlation coefficient up there, it's less than 0.3. So the two aren't directly connected together. So let's define the 2 points. How are they different? Now, because of the great work of Ehrenberg Bass, this is a much easier definition for distinctiveness, making your brand easily identified by customers. To use the great Byron Sharp quote, a brand that looks like itself, and of course, coming to mind in buying situations, making our brand distinct, driving salience, supremely important, and thanks to Ehrenberg Bass, on the radar of many marketers now. How could we have missed this point? It's an extraordinarily important one. But let's not forget differentiation. Now, here's where we have to be a little smarter than Michael Porter. Let me tell you about my brother-in-law, Luke. My brother-in-law, Luke, is about 5'9". I'm about 6'2", I'm taller than him. And that makes me different from him. It doesn't mean Luke doesn't have height. It doesn't mean I've invented height and it's a unique thing that I have. It just means I have more of it than him. And if someone is looking for someone to work on a work site or hold scaffolding, my extra 3 inches could indeed be quite useful. The point is, that's relative differentiation. There's nothing unique here, but that doesn't preclude it being different. I'm different from Luke because I am taller. I haven't invented anything, but I'm still relatively different. So my definition, which ties in beautifully with Kantar's work, and that is a coincidence, we're working from different places, is that differentiation is ensuring your brand is perceived to be relatively different from alternatives on attributes and associations that matter to your target customers. And you can argue that's a lot of the meaningful dimension that Kantar talk about, enough to therefore influence purchase decisions. So how do you as a marketer achieve relative differentiation? We're here to help you in this session, not just to talk about things. Well, I would give you 3 pieces of advice. First, here's what you have to let go of. You have to let go of the idea of some kind of unique shit that's attached to your brand. You have to let go of the idea you can own a specific attribute that no one else gets anywhere near. But here's my key point. You have to get rid of complexity. Positioning in almost every company I've seen over the last 10 years is a joke. It's become an end in itself. It's become 14 slides, 6 concepts, 24 words. It's bullshit. Complexity will stop you achieving relative differentiation because you're trying to do too much across too many nonsensical concepts. And finally, multiplicity. If you follow the effectiveness literature, it is clear that you would position your brand to everyone in the market And you would do so for the long of it without worrying about segments. When it gets to performance, there's a much better case for targeting and segmentation. But when it gets to positioning your brand and achieving relative differentiation, aim for everyone in the market, the sophisticated mass market that Ehrenberg Bass talk about. So what does it look like? Choose a concept for your position. Call it purpose. Call it brand positioning. Call it value prop. Call it magic moonbeams. It doesn't matter. But the minute you add more concepts, like a child in a toy room, the thing falls apart through complexity. A tight attribute list. And when I'm saying tight, I'm not saying less than 25 things. My experience has shown me that I think you've got room for 2 or 3 attributes or associations where you might be able to achieve relative differentiation. They might be category entry points. They might be product attributes. They might be associations. Choose carefully, but the key word is choice. And use the 3 C's to pick out the ones that the customer wants, your company can deliver better than the competition. And therefore, differentiation really happens at the level of execution. Driven by a very tight sense of your positioning, execution becomes different. You're saying less things. You're saying them more often. You're saying them to everyone in the market. You're saying them across many different media. You're saying them with 60% of your budget, exactly as Field and Burnett would prescribe, or whatever the right proportion is for your category. You're saying them with better creative. You're saying them across more than advertising, because advertising is a relatively weak touch point. Everything from packaging to distribution to the way that the CEO does stuff needs to be aligned. And we're saying it for much longer. Wear out doesn't exist. We're pretty certain of that now. You're using the same campaign or the same campaign theme for a decade in order to get the point across. And my last point, I'm saying it with distinctiveness, because we live in a both-fist world where you can have both. Distinctiveness and differentiation can work together. It isn't some duel of 2 enemies, yeah? Instead, think of it more as a winning combination, yeah? A famous duo. I'm sort of in this in a weird way, but you get my point, right? It's Morecambe and Wise. The 2 working together. Maybe one of them is more important than the other, but the 2 together work better than either of them on their own. Such things are possible. So my challenge to you as a marketer is a 1-page challenge. Get rid of your stupid brand position. Stop making positioning an end in itself. It's actually reducing your possibilities for relative differentiation. Have a singular concept, a tight 3 or 4 word attribute list that you choose to win on in terms of relative differentiation. Remember that word relative though. You're not going to own it, but relative to your size, relative to your category, relative to your competitors, you're going to grow an unfair advantage in certain perceptions. These are the things that are important to your customer. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. You're not going to change them for a decade because it takes a decade for this shit to properly work. Now, at the same time, I'm also going to focus on my brand codes, distinctive brand assets, distinctive assets, because if positioning drives differentiation, your brand codes drive your distinctiveness. The lessons, again from Ehrenberg Bass, are clear. You want a handful of them, logo plus 3. They should be, in this case, however, unique. And, using Jenny Romaniuk's famous grid, they should be ones that are famous, or at least famous for your brand. Again, you shouldn't change these, but after about 40 years, you get to play with them because effectiveness can happen that way, as McDonald's and Tiffany's will tell you. But it takes, in my experience, 40 years of reinforcing the codes before you can have the fun and the effectiveness of playing with them. And here's the key bit. On a single sheet of paper. Yeah. Without that, the minute we add more slides, it's not going to work. You're fucked. It's not going to happen. But the single page, doing less with focus and strategy as a choice, offers you an opportunity for relative differentiation. I would highlight KitKat as one of the most wonderful examples of getting the distinctiveness differentiation challenge 100% right. They've been saying the same shit for 40 years. It's a clarity on what the distinctive assets are of the brand, and it's a clarity of a very tight positioning that basically fundamentally comes down to we own taking a break. Yeah? There ain't nothing wrong with the lack of complexity there, the lack of other attributes. And they've been banging the same fucking drum for 50 years with more and more effectiveness. They say the same thing over and over again across the decades. And you know what? As meaning layers on top of meaning, as distinctiveness builds on top of distinctiveness, it only gets stronger. So let us stop this childish, silly, juvenile distinctiveness versus differentiation battle. Let us use the generosity of and let us be a little bit greedier for our brands. Both can be present. I even give you the point that they may not necessarily be equal. If I could average it out, I would probably cede to Ehrenberg Bass that on average, maybe 60 or 70% of the challenge of branding is indeed distinctiveness and driving salience. It's that important, and their discoveries are that crucial. But that does not mean we need to get rid of differentiation. And I think those numbers and that balance will vary by category. And I think, thanks to the work of Kantar, we can also be clear that it seems to vary by brand age as well. Their data, again, I've learned a lot from this very lovely data set, that if you look at how brands begin, they typically index the ones that grow at the early stages with a lot of differentiation. But later on in their maturity cycle, what do you know? It becomes all about salience, pushing the growth prospects earlier. So how do brands grow? Differently, at different stages in a brand's age. The book, the Great Red Book, may not be perfect. So in summary, marketers overstated differentiation. They overstated how important it was. They overstated the uniqueness. They got carried away with themselves. And I think the USP stands in my list of all-time bullshit concepts at number one, because it sent a generation of marketers in completely the wrong direction. But we're a fickle bunch. And so thanks to the influence of a couple of very good thinkers who did a big favor for the discipline by pointing out differentiation was horseshit, we ended up swinging our pendulum in exactly the opposite direction, all the way to distinctiveness and making differentiation some kind of theoretical enemy that doesn't exist. I want to encourage you to practice the act of bothism, the generosity of and, the idea that we can have both, yeah? We can have the cake, we can eat it as well, and it will make our brand stronger. The Kantar data teaches us this. Aim for relative differentiation. Make choices on the 2 or 3 things where you will be perceived to be relatively stronger to your consumers, and then hold true to those 2 or 3 North Stars. Ally it with distinctiveness. There's nothing to stop you like Kit Kat from being very clear on we stand for taking a break, and we have red, we have the bars, we have the break, and we have clear distinctive assets. Together, you have a more powerful approach. I've given the Ehrenberg Bass Institute a shit ton of pain in these 30 minutes. Let me be very clear. Professor Byron Sharp remains our greatest thinker of the last 50 years. The Ehrenberg Bass Institute has done more for marketing than everybody else pretty much put together. But they're occasionally wrong. Science is all about proving someone is not quite right. I've just done it. It's okay. Let's progress forward. Let's accept that. Let's appreciate them. But also let's appreciate that sometimes we go off too far in one direction. And let's also celebrate the tenacity of Kantar. Throughout this 10 years where everyone's been shitting on differentiation, Kantar had the guts to continue to measure and promote these concepts of meaningful differentiation. And they deserve a shit ton of credit, because that was a brave thing to do when every client was parroting out the idea that differentiation wasn't even possible, never mind valuable. Anyway, now the weekend weather. Now a Q&A, where we can take any questions that you may have on any topic, hopefully the presentation, but anything else related to what we've been talking about here. See you over on the sofa.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. That was amazing.
Thank you.
It's brilliant to have you with us, to be grilled further. Mark has no idea, by the way, what we're going to be asking.
No, that's the way it should be too, by the way.
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of surprising you with a series of different questions, seeing as different is the topic of the day.
That should be the way.
Yeah. So I'm going to start off with an easy one, okay, because you've been talking about, bothism.
Yes.
But I still want to ask, who's got the better glasses, me or you? We can't both have them.
The point of bothism is, if you put these two together on this set, it's better than one of us or the other one of us having the specs. That's the point of bothism, that the two together are better than either one. So the answer is both of us.
We are bigger than some of our
We are,
arts,
and
yeah.
that spectacle's a part of it.
Okay, we'll take that offline because mine is still better.
We'll compare prescriptions later.
We will, yeah. Okay, so it was easing you in gently. So I know it's only, beginning of October.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't really want to bring up, the C word.
Yeah.
Not obviously that C word.
Well, you can if you want.
Well, I can. I mean, this is a family show.
Okay.
Yeah. So Christmas. Okay. Now, we know you've had strong feelings about Christmas. Everyone's got strong feelings about Christmas advertising. But it'd be good to get kind of your view on the traditional, kind of John Lewis approach. Is it kind of sales driving at its finest? Is it just an overblown vanity project? We've seen lots over the years. What do you think is going to happen this year?
There's a couple of things going on, right? We're in an interesting recession, depression period. I see it everywhere I go. It's palpable. I think we're all a little bit miserable, but we're happy to be miserable compared to being locked up in a pandemic. So there's this weird vibe, which is it's shitty, but better than it has been, right? In that kind of context, we know that Christmas advertising, which can be more emotional, which harkens back to an earlier era, actually has a lot of power for brands. So that's the pro-it. The negative point is we've been doing that for quite a long time. John Lewis started doing this 15 years ago, and everyone has been jumping on board. And of course, the old zigzag lesson is once everyone zigs in an emotional way at Christmas, the power of that zigging diminishes, and zagging is maybe a better thing to do. And I think we'll see more of that this Christmas. So I think you'll see that battle between it's shitty and therefore a nice warm Christmas message is good. But some brands going, I think we've overdone this now. We need to find the next thing. They're the two things I'd expect. The one great point about Christmas advertising, why do we just do it at Christmas? You know what I mean? Why can't we have characters and emotion throughout the year? Do you know what I mean? It is an interesting thought, right? If you look at the Kantar data, it does tell us the power of meaningfulness, emotion. Why are we restraining ourselves to that sort of 4-week period around Christmas when the whole point is it's a long predisposition message as we learn?
Okay. And what I also think is interesting there is that you talked about kind of brands zagging when others zig. And that kind of leads me on quite nicely to Twitter.
Yes.
Which obviously I know that you've had views on and mentioned in the past.
Yeah, they are. Yes.
They've certainly, been zagging, to use a polite term. I prefer what you've just said.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the future like for them?
Look, it's pretty bad. I mean, I like Elon Musk. I think he's quite brave, and we need people that are in this era that are brave enough to speak out. But I'm going to offset that with the fact that I'm increasingly worried that he might have slightly lost the marbles a bit too. A great man that may be sort of, deviating a bit. What he's doing with Twitter makes no sense to man or woman. Do you know what I mean? It's wrong for it. I wrote an article the day he did it and turned it all into X. I think it was the 12 reasons why this is stupid. And not all of it is still perfectly applicable. We've got another 10 reasons why what he's doing is totally bad. So, sometimes, a pipe is a pipe, and sometimes stupidity is stupidity.
So if you could get him alone in a room, kind of like sort of 5 minutes.
Yeah, in a sort of homoerotic way. Yes.
That's where I was going. So I'm glad.
In togas.
I'm glad we're on the same page. Yeah. But, that aside, like after the toga bit, if you could give him 3 pieces of advice, like what do you think, you would say to him that would make him go, oh, you know what, I am stupid. I've been an absolute idiot.
Look, I give him one piece of advice, which is you are not the consumer. And that's where his ego has led him into the wrong place, yeah? He's missing the biggest lesson of all in marketing, which God bless Kantar for reminding us once a year, you are not the consumer. When you work on something, when you own it, when you run it, you have no idea what it's like to be a user of Twitter. And if I've seen one thing in my career that haunts me, it's marketers that start to go native. And because they spend 8 hours a day and 5 days a week on their brand, they start thinking their toothpaste is important to consumers. And patently, consumers don't give a fuck. That doesn't mean it's bad news. What it means is manage your brand from a place of realism where consumers really don't care. And you'll be a much better brand manager, and your brand will paradoxically be much more successful. Stop pretending that anyone cares about the purpose of your sandwiches. Do you know what I mean? They don't. And once you get that market orientation point, you're winning. I fear that Mr. Musk is not on that wavelength. He's making decisions based on his own extremely big intelligence, but one that is not in the place where the consumers.
Yeah. And you said that, you still find him kind of heavily influential.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, him aside, let's just say that you've got a dinner party. I mean, toga's optional. I'm sensing this is a thing for you.
Yes.
But who would you invite? So you can invite, let's say, 2 or 3, or even 4, if you can think of 4 people that you'd really want to kind of pick their brains around decisions that they've made, people that you feel that you could learn from. Who would you have?
Yeah, well, I'd have Sir Simon Marks, who's dead, so we have to bring him back to life. He was the mastermind behind Marks and Spencer and remains one of my big heroes. So I'd have him there. I'd like Coco Chanel. I worked many years for Louis Vuitton against Chanel. She's a fascinating woman. The whole spying and sleeping with Nazi spies stuff, I just think is... And then she still manages to get the brand back on. It's just an incredible... It's even better than the movie would tell you. You know what I mean? So there's a woman I'd like to get more insights from. And then I'd probably round it out with Richard Hennessy, the founder of Hennessy. The Hennessy's were originally assassins, literally assassins, back in the 17th century. And sometimes you read these founder stories and they're very dull. You know what I mean? If you read the Thomas Burberry story, he's basically, he worked in drapery and he was from Birmingham. It's terribly boring, right? But when you read the Richard Hennessy story, you get this vibrant sense that he was an absolute fucking maniac. And I'd really like to check if that's true. But from what we know about him, going around killing English people, I just thought it was fantastic. So they'd be the 3. And obviously we'd have to get spectacularly drunk for it to really kick off. But thinking of those 3 people, they all did like a beverage, so I think it would work fine.
I mean, that would be quite an evening.
I reckon it would kick off. You could come.
Can I come too?
You can come too.
Brilliant. Only if my big shoulders are allowed.
You're allowed in, for sure.
Excellent. Glad we've clarified that. I think we've got time for, another couple of questions, which is brilliant. AI. I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about AI. It's not been a big topic today, but we know, exactly. But we know, obviously, how important it is moving forwards. Lots of different views. But for you, AI, friend or foe to the world of marketing?
It's a bit of both. In the short term, it's the latest massive distraction that will, I've got data that says big brands in the UK, when they brief their agencies, 2/3 of them can't even brief the agency on who they're targeting. Like they're useless, right? And yet they're all obsessed with AI. And it's like, you know what? You just need to do the basics. And the reason we don't do the basics is we get obsessed with AI, metaverses, monkeys with glasses on, and, it's just nonsense. So my first feeling is it's a huge distraction. But my second feeling down the track is this one does have a lot more legs. If you look at what it's going to do for media planning, i.e. wipe it out. If you look at what it's going to do for companies offering econometrics, wipe them out. It's not going to happen straight away. But I've already seen examples of AI that are able to match consumer data to the tune of 92, 93% just by immediately scraping the web. That is a phenomenal change in how we understand. It's a massive issue for Kantar, right? And so I think, the old Bill Gates quote, we overstate the short term, we underestimate the long term. I think it is the real deal, but it'll take a while. But yeah, it's coming. And I think, I'll give you one example. I run a program called the Mini MBA. Yeah. I love Germany. We only get about 4% of German marketers on the course because not all German marketers speak as good in English as perhaps other countries. We were able for, 8,000 quid to turn me into a perfectly spoken German with the lips moving and everything. And it took about 4 hours. And it was all done using AI. And I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to have my voice. It just took our existing class materials and just turned me into a perfectly spoken German. And slightly more handsome too, which is strange.
Wow, AI can really work wonders.
In that case, miracles, I would say. Magic. Miracles, yes.
Yeah, sorcery. Yeah. Right, 44 seconds to go.
Okay.
So let's keep it sharp and pointed.
Okay.
Are there any brands out there that are kind of catching your eye in terms of, those that are sort of on the up doing interesting things?
Well, M&S was the one I was looking out for. I was really interested. I couldn't see a future for M&S 10 years ago because being in the middle is just the worst place to be. But all credit to them. I think it's a remarkable victory for management. The other one is Coca-Cola, man. You look at that data this morning on Coca-Cola. They're in a dying category, right? Sugared, carbonated beverages, right? You couldn't think of anything that sucks more for the 21st century. And yet here is Coke growing its brand almost double digit. And that's a triumph of brand management over category and brand. And that team should be enormously proud. Sometimes you get a brand that's just a beauty, right? You just don't screw it up. In the case of Coca-Cola, that team is working wonders, and they deserve almost double points, in my opinion. Because when you're selling carbonated, sugared beverages and still growing, I think that's a hell of an achievement. Yeah.
I mean, some people are sort of saying that's easy when you're a big established brand like Coke anyway.
It's true.
How easy would it be for kind of smaller sort of challenger brands to achieve?
Pretty much impossible. So it's a great point to raise at the end. Never forget that in the league table of what drives at least advertising effectiveness, the existing size of your brand is a massive multiplier, bigger than everything else. Budget, quality of creative, media choices. Capitalism isn't fair. Big brands have it easier than small brands. And I get all the time asked by small brands, well, what do we need to do to reverse that? And the answer is you don't. You just don't grow, you know? Yeah. It's not fair. Who told you this game was fair? You know, look at your top 10. They're big brands that have just got a little bit bigger. Do you know what I mean? David doesn't beat Goliath. Goliath kicks David's head in. That's the story of branding, you know?
I think we'll have to end it on the story of David and Goliath.
There we go.
Which is a great one. And amazingly, you're going to stick around even further.
If you get me beer later on, I will, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I promise. I'm not paying for it, though.
Okay. As long as I'm not.
So we have one more session left for you. And in this final session, we'll be having a panel discussion. Mark will be part of that panel. And the conversation will be led by Sophie Devonshire, CEO of the Marketing Society. And we're going to be moving away from the theoretical to the practical. So in this session, we're going to be hearing from those behind the brands who really have grown their meaningful difference and done what others are trying to do. So what can we learn from them? How did they do it? What challenges did they come up against? And ultimately, what can we learn? So really excited about this last session. So without further ado, welcome Sophie.